Hello duelists and welcome back to the channel. Sorry I have not been posting as much recently. I have not been feeling the best. We went to 2 events in a row. Unfortunately, during the second event I did get sick, so I haven't been able to create content. However, I am feeling better now. Still a little congested, but overall feeling good, and I'm ready to make you guys some more content. Today we'll be going over YCS Las Vegas 2023, the first event of the new format. I want to go over the top deck lists, if the meta was what we expected, anything that was interesting about it, and how the meta will be progressing from here. So pretty much a grand analysis of the metagame of the format in the wake of YCS Las Vegas 2023. But if you cannot get enough of the rich, complex, and tactical games, join me in playing Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends is a mobile hero RPG game played by over 80 million people across the globe. Construct a team of champions that can work together in symbiosis to triumph over the opponents. It can be live opponents, it could be dungeon bosses, you can play into whatever you feel like. With over 650 customizable heroes, the game is a vast and expansive decision tree to put your tactical prowess to the test. With new content frequently being added, the metagame will constantly be fresh and evolving to make sure that the best players are the ones who can adapt and innovate constantly. A lot like other games we enjoy. So all duelists with a competitive bone like myself, make sure to join me in this game. It'll be a great time and you can put our skills to the test. Just like any other game, I like to do well, but also utilize the specific strategies that are interesting to me. There are currently 3 champions that I'm looking to get and build my teams around. 3. Harvest Jack. This guy is probably the least sensible of my top 3 picks for desirable champions. I can't quite put my finger on what's so appealing about him, what allures me to the demonic jack-o'-lantern. He's an S-tier ranked champion with incredible, unique, and detailed art and a captivating lore that is straight out of a horror novel. He reminds me of Halloween a lot, and I don't know, I've always liked the oddities and unique mysteries around Halloween. So 2, Cupidus, another S-tier champion that belongs to the Sacred Order. If you've kept up with my vlogs, you know I have an affinity for classic literature, history, and mythology. So I'm super excited to see that Raid Shadow Legends appeals my interests, not just in the gameplay area, but also with lore as well. Of course, Cupid being the Roman god of love and desire and affection. Very interested to wield the power of a Roman god. This also lines up well with the current Raid Shadowlands Valentine's event going on right now, so fitting in theme a bit right there. But my number 1 most desired champion is Miscreated Monster, an S+ tier tank that is a direct fusion of my favorite book of all time with Raid Shadow Legend. A wretch reborn by a young mage that terrifies all who lays their eyes upon it. It roams around the shadows away from the judgment of creatures, and it is unknown whether the miscreant was actually given a soul. I love that I'm able to incorporate elements of myself and my personality into games like this, where I can still do something like good and not just get last place, but also play the game to its fullest while having a bit of myself on display here. So obviously this is from Frankenstein, the Mary Shelley book from centuries ago. So I'm super interested in being able to combine my interests together, and Miscreated Monster would be a great addition to my team. If you may recall, I mentioned a Valentine's Day event happening in the game as we speak, so let me elaborate. New players can enjoy Valentine's themed adventure with Raid Love Quest. All you have to do is download Raid Shadow Legends from one of the links below, copy your game ID, and head over to raidlovequest.polarium.com. There you can compete in mini-games and that earn real-life prizes such as Amazon gift cards worth up to $1,000. Old Raid players can feel the love too. Use special code StValentine23 to get a special gift from us to you. If you haven't already embarked on your Raid journey, click on my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. You'll get a free epic rare champion, Kronaru, as well as other unique bonuses worth $30. What are you waiting for? Hop in the game with me and build your team to conquer the world of Raid Shadow Legends. Okay, let's continue on with the YuGiOh talk now. So as we can see here, based off the top 8 of YCS Las Vegas, we didn't actually get a crazy amount of variety in Top Cut. It is definitely more than we saw in the last format, but it's nothing in comparison to what we had this time last year or approaching Nationals format last year. Kashtira does seem to be the dominant choice here, but it's not, again, to the same degree as Tier Elements. And then we have other things popping up as well. So I'm going to create a bit of a tier list for this deck, at least where I think they each stand. And because there weren't that many options, again, it's not that much, I've included some other stuff that I feel is worth mentioning. So as for the Tier 1 decks, we'll put these in A. I don't think anything is Tier 0. I think there's 3 big candidates here, and they are the ones that were the most apparent on the pie chart as well. That's Kashtira being the clear winner. Despia was there as well, and I do think Labyrinth is probably there, at least for the moment. Labyrinth taking up the least of those spots, and I think that may also change if people become more prepared for it. However, I don't think it was that much of a sleeper pick this event. I think most people should have reasonably been prepared for it, and it wouldn't have caught off that many people. Kashtira shouldn't be a surprise. It has a lot of powerful options behind its tool belt. It kind of feels like the deck to beat, right? Going first against Kashtira may be fine a lot of the time. I think it has a lot of weaknesses going second if the disruption is built to beat Kashtira. Going first, it seems there's not a great way to beat it because everything you can choose tech card wise doesn't always beat it. I'll explain what that means after I'm on the tier list. As for Despia, it's the second most populous on the chart. I don't think this deck is fantastic, but when it does resolve a branded fusion and isn't stopped by Ash Blossom, it is strong, and a lot of advancements were made in the deck to make it stronger, to the point where it almost feels as toxic as the Kashtira deck now when it plays an uninterrupted. I'd call it interesting, but frankly, it's not. So yeah, I mean, I'll again elaborate on each of these decks a bit further. And then the third one, Labyrinth, I talked about a bit. Yeah, I mean, this is just trap decks and it's able to clear really fast. It reminds you of Altergeist, where it snowballs pretty well. And if you just have a decent setup, you'll kill them within a turn or two, and you can get a lot of traps constantly that will keep your opponent off playing. And there's very few restrictions on it to stop you from playing. Probably the least variation amongst the Labyrinth decks, unless I am not understanding it that well, but I'll explain it a bit later. As for Sprite, what do I feel about this? A couple of these did top the event, but I honestly think it's not good. It just feels like a deck that can fit a bunch of utility cards in, so therefore should be able to counter the meta, but I don't think it plays around your opponent's utility cards that well. I don't think it's that consistent. I don't think it's that powerful either. And I think if you're going to put an engine together with like utility cards and then have that be like an anti-meta choice, I don't think Sprite's the best option. Honestly, I'd put it in tier 3. I don't think it's good enough. Maybe that's being pessimistic towards Sprite because I've never really been that fond of it, but I don't think it's that strong. Next up, Sword Soul. I think this is a very similar boat. And the biggest thing is when you're putting these decks together that should be a small engine that combines with utility cards to be an anti-meta-ish strategy or mid-range type deck. Sword Soul was poised to be one of those for this event, and it did pretty bad considering I feel like it was decently presented. I think that's largely in part to the fact that the tech cards you want to play to beat stuff like Kashtira, like Eclipse, Lava Golem, are good versus Sword Soul. And when you're trying to build an anti-meta deck like this, you don't want your deck to be weak to the same stuff that everyone else is already playing. So I think this card is a mistake unless Kashtira falls out of the meta, and I'd put it in a solid like tier 3. Tier Elements, this is a big one. We didn't really see it in top cut of this event, and I myself thought maybe some people would innovate with it, but we can't find anything so far. And while I have been messing around with other new ideas for Tier Elements that I may share on the channel, I've been struggling to find a way to really make it work. I think it's largely in part to just having such a bad Kashtira matchup. I think if that deck were to fall out of the meta, or even just change like in power level, this deck could probably be okay because I think it functions well versus other stuff, but playing into your Rise Heart is just so hard. And then the other stuff as well is just kind of rough. I think as long as Kashtira is in the meta, Tier will struggle at its current power level to the point where it's probably just a rogue deck for the time being. I'd love to be proven wrong. I think Tier has the most potential to kind of be something bigger. Next up are two decks that I think people weren't really expecting that much, Naturia and Ninjas. So let me go over Naturia first. Now this is the deck that Peck and Cody made top 16 with at the YCS. They did pretty well in Swiss as well, I believe, going undefeated till the last round, where I don't know if they even played the last round. And yeah, this deck is good. You can make Barkion versus trap decks to make Naturia Beast for everything else, and Naturia Beast is pretty good versus other decks, as well as using the runic cards to try break fields, to draw cards, to enable synchro plays, as well as some other cool synchro stuff. I don't have the best expertise in this deck. I do think that sometimes it has some choke points in your combos where you have to invest your first cards in to trigger a fountain, and then if they stop you there, you kind of fall apart. I'm a bit concerned that may be an issue. However, truthfully, I can't give my best opinions on it. I think it has a great turn 1, and it has enough flexibility to be decent going second. I'm going to put it in tier 2. I do think this is one of the decks that could have potential moving forward. Yeah, I think it needs maybe more exploration. It wasn't that well represented at Vegas, and if it gets represented more, then maybe it can be a full power like deck in the meta. That's the big on Ninja. Yeah, so this is the deck that I played. Now, obviously, I wouldn't play a deck if I didn't think it was decent. I really do think this deck is good. It may not be full on tier 1 because it does have some problems, but I think this deck has a lot of potential. It's not garbage. I think it plays a lot of utility cards like these decks, but isn't weak to the same stuff like Eclipse or Book of Moon like these decks are. It punishes interaction with Maizen, and it has a lot of good disruption because of YuGiOh, because of Green Ninja, and Yagamaru even. I think the deck is incredibly well designed and very unique, and I really do think it is a good rogue option. I think if you want to play something rogue, or there's not these 3 decks but still have a really good chance, these 2 decks are probably where you want to be. I think they can fit in the utility cards to be anti-meta and aren't overly weak to all the cards you'd expect to be seeing. I really do like Ninja, and I think it has its place in the meta, and I'm curious to see if more people are willing to try it after myself and Vlad used it, because I think it has potential. It needs people to learn and kind of get behind it. This is how I'm kind of feeling right now. I'm feeling like these 3 are the best decks, so I'm going to kind of elaborate a little more on each of these. So if you recall, I did say that Kashtira had a couple of variations in the way you can play your turn 1, and this is being a big issue for players playing utility cards. And when you're deciding what utility cards to play, obviously you want to decide or design it specifically to beat what you're expecting. But if Kashtira are able to switch it up in a way that makes it hard to beat, then it becomes kind of like almost flipping a coin for both players. You play around something that they may have, but then you lose to the other card. It's rough. Anyways, I'll show you guys the 3 combos, then I'll kind of go over what they lose to, what they don't. So this is a 1-card combo. It's super easy, and there's different ways to go about it. This is one that's seeing a lot of popularity right now, and its play is very simple, and a lot of players have been going for this more and more, and that's just a Rise Heart Pass. The biggest reason for this is you aren't weak to Nibiru here, aren't weak to Lava Golem, and aren't weak to Sphere Mode. You leave yourself more vulnerable to stuff like, you know, just general advantage cards like triple tactics talents, and your opponent can use more spells without now getting their zones locked out when you chain the Rise Heart with a standard field. If this is what I'm expecting to play against a regame, this deck's actually very fair, because you can design to beat it. While it's very strong to have a Macrocosmos that's also a banished on either player's turn and can generate resources, especially when backed up with back row, it's not insane. So I don't know. I'm okay to see this being like the trend, and I do think it has merit. Obviously, it has seen a lot of success. It's lower investment, and not being blown up by Nibiru is huge. But it has other weaknesses, right? So like if they have 1 Book of Moon, before Book of Moon wasn't as good, Book of Moon is really good against this, and then just general advantage stuff is better, right? Like if you have multiple Kashtira monsters into this, you need good defensive options, otherwise you could just get pushed through. And then if Thrust and Talents are being played, then yeah, these are better against this as well. This is a mandatory trigger to attach, so even if you wanted to hold the banish, you really can't avoid those cards. I think if you play against a deck that is weak to the Macrocosmos, this is fantastic, because they're almost inclined to play something like Lava Golems and Nibirus, because if they don't, they have no recourse versus the Lock 5 combo. And from their perspective, if they play those cards, they have no recourse against this. So it puts them in a really tough spot. They probably have it the worst, and that's kind of why I'm thinking graveyard decks are in a bad position right now. You're forced to make these crazy 50-50s. Obviously, the Lock 5 isn't guaranteed, but I will show you guys it's not as hard as you think. Okay, so this is the second standard field. Oftentimes, the Rise Art has 3 materials, but it does depend a bit. And then during the standby phase, they can summon off Shangri-La. They don't have to, and they may not always, but they often will. The downside to using the Shangri-La special from deck is that now your opponent can make a Rise Heart with any 1 Kashtira as well. And then also it turns on Thrust for the turn. Both are small risks, nothing crazy, but they are risks nonetheless. So you have to decide if they're worth it based off the rest of your defensive options. If you're ending on this specific field and you do that, then you could just lose to a simple summon a Kashtira guy, make a Rise, attack, Zeus, gone, because nothing gets banished to get a Rise Heart the materials to get its effect. But yeah, so when we talk about what utility cards beat this, it's Eclipse still, but Nibiru hits it, Lava Golem hits it, Sphere Mode hits it. Some of the stuff like Talents may not as much, because if you go for like 3 back row here or 3 monster zones, and then they summon a guy and you hit and you go banish it, and then you trigger a hacker and this, and you banish the last 2 or hit the last 2. Now they can't use triple tactics. Pretty much over anyways. It has upsides and downsides. Again, Book of Moon here is one that's like decent. Book of Moon stops either zones or the macro, but it's not everything. If the Fenrir is up here as well, it's kind of annoying, because if you like hit this and you summon and use an effect, Fenrir, banish, hit zone, mind hacker, hit zone. So they want, like, if they're going to use an effect, they want to hit this, because this is left up, so they still have a good interrupt, and they still have this. Like even if this like doesn't lock zones, this hitting like 10 cards off the top of the deck could also be really, really annoying. Because they lose about a third of their deck. That is kind of rough for most decks. This is like the most common play right now. So most people are building their like anti-Kashtira lineup to beat this field, which kind of makes me not want to do this very often because it's what people are expecting to. But if people switch up what they are building against to be the other variations of the combo, then you can go back to this more often. It's very much making an on-the-fly call for these boards, and it's rough because they all cover some stuff and not everything. This is a lock 5 combo. It is not that crazy. You do need 3 cards for it, so it's not like the easiest thing in the world. You can do it enough of the time, and a lot of pieces are interchangeable. As you can see here, like it's frequent enough that if you have no ways to beat it, you'll just concede some games, and that's rough. You have to hope your opponent doesn't want to like go for it in fear of Nibiru, because otherwise it's so easy to do. Keep in mind, I've used the field spell late. I didn't say it here. I popped the Shangri era later. I should have done it immediately. Obviously, it doesn't impact anything. But yeah, this is lock the first one once with this, and then make these 2, trigger this, banish, lock 2, trigger the hacker again, 2 more. Yeah, you know how it goes. Almost not that crazy, but yeah, like what beats this? Nibiru, obviously. Hand traps can sometimes, but hand traps aren't great because it means you just like divert to the weaker combo. Can't Eclipse, can't Talents, can't Book a Moon, can't Branded Fusion, can't Red Eyes Fusion. So yeah, this is obviously rough. This is like concerning for a duelist like myself, because I'm thinking maybe I can play this like Zoo format and have all these quick play spells in my deck, like Chalice, Forbidden Lands, Enemy Controller, the cards that are seeing play and did well this weekend, and then try and break fields that way, and then all decent utility cards going first as well, because they're more impactful. And they have typically the most range. But against this field, they don't. Can't use them. So it's a bit concerning, and I'm not sure where it goes from here. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, this makes you want to play Lava Golem Sphere mode. And those cards aren't great. So yeah, this is the third variation, and it happens the least often. But it does happen enough that I feel like you have to be prepared for it. But I feel like there's not a great way to prepare for it. If we decide we have to prepare for it, and that means the best card is Nibiru to put in, then the Kashtira players should be going for the first combo that doesn't play into Nibiru. And then we're in a weird spot where we either go for the first combo or the third combo at all times. If we are able to do the third combo, we just put them on Don't Have Nibiru. And if we aren't, then we just play around the Nibiru and end on the Arise Heart. Maybe that's where it has to go. For the opposing players, for anybody playing utility cards, 3 Nibirus and the rest of cards that are good versus the Arise Heart stuff. So yeah, the utility cards in Kashtira are kind of debatable for that reason. Like, there's so many options and people can't really decide, even amongst like their own teams. The first place team, Lava Golem, and decide for one of the lists and not the other two. Other two, or there's imperbs in them. Some of these lists have stuff like Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, Enemy Controller, Forbidden Lands, all these quick play spells that are in here. But if people go for this lock 5 more often, a lot of that stuff is worse. So interesting to see how this lineup evolves. There were no Nibirus in the main deck of the first place lists. I don't think there were any on the side either, except for Silverman, who played 1 in the first place list. But if people are going for lock 5, then they essentially say they have no outs. They have only Ashen Emperor to kind of hope to slow it down, but as we saw in the finals, A, it may not even slow them down, and B, they'll still be a field either way. It won't be fully stopping them. So yeah, I am still doom and gloom over Kashtira, a lot of the times flipping coins on what they're going to do. If I was a Kashtira player, again, I would probably avoid combo 2 and just go for 1 and 3, full lock 5, or just the safe play. I think safe play is pretty good. One thing that I kind of omitted in the safe play is that with the 2 trap cards, you can kind of get a little more backup there as well. Big Bang is nice because if you use it, you can also reattach to the Rise Heart and then later trigger it. And then Preparations is a good follow-up as well. And still Disruption on the turn. Yeah, I think that's mostly it for Kashtira, and it's interesting to see how it evolves from here. One thing I'd like to note, if people are going for this like quick play spell heavy version, ends on just a Rise Heart pass most of the time, and then sometimes locks 5, playing something like Lightning Storm might be good. Because if it's in attack mode, the Rise Heart, you can kill that. But you can also get backward, right? Hitting stuff like Birth, Preparations, Lance, Book, very strong. I think if they're not going for the lock you out play, they're going for an advantage game plan. Getting like a +2 in a Lightning Storm is really, really good. So I think that's a card to look out for, especially because it also pairs well into other matchups. I do think Lightning Storm is also pretty good against Despia if they're not Gimmick puppeting you, because you hit the red, force stuff out right there, hit Beast, and then it's a lot easier to play through their fields, and you can then Eclipse them afterwards, and it means not getting like a good value Chimera. And then versus Labyrinth, I don't have to say enough, like, it just, yeah, it's good against that deck. Unless they have Lord. of Heavenly Prison. Or Lord of Heavenly Prison. So that's probably the one thing I'd look out for. On the topic of Lightning Storm, it was interesting that if you check the top 4 deck list for Lightning Storm, there's 1 copy in all the top 4. It's 12 deck lists. I think there was more Feather Duster, but not crazy amount. Feather Duster, there were 9. So people weren't respecting Labyrinth a crazy amount, and I have to wonder if people now start putting in back removal cards for a Labyrinth, if that'll affect how well they do in the future. So that's why I said for now I'd put them in this tier 1 position. If it starts struggling because it's given more respect, there is a chance it falls down to here. And I think that could happen. It is a bit hard to predict at all times, all the moving pieces in a format. It's like an ecosystem, and you can't predict everything. But with more of a target on its shoulder, there's a good chance this cannot keep up with the other 2. Another thing with Lightning Storm also being kind of so scarce here, this means people aren't playing around it. So I think really would consider as an option in your deck, Lightning Storm. Now, obviously, the biggest downside to Lightning Storm is it's kind of similar to cards like Lava Golem and Sphere Mode, where they're effectively useless when you go first. So as far as the main deck option goes, it's still kind of concerning. I don't know if that poses it out of the question entirely, but I'd be interested in trying it myself, and I think it definitely has, merit to being a good option in the future. Moving on to the branded deck. Well, this deck has seen probably the most innovation since we saw it last June-ish. Nothing has changed in ban list wise from that deck since then. So it was very feasible for players to show up with the deck they had about 10 months ago and say, this is good enough for the event. Well, a lot of the topping lists for this event did stray from the past, which makes sense in a lot of ways that are predictable and some that maybe aren't. So I'm going to go over a couple of them right now. One of the biggest ones that we did see was the Gimmick Puppet combo. If you aren't aware what the Gimmick Puppet combo is, Gimmick Puppet Nightmare or Deed Orthros, you're just going to summon this card to your opponent from Branded Expulsion. You send it off Branded Fusion, and then what it does is for the rest of the turn, you can't summon monsters. Very toxic. It's not much else to it, right? So if you're playing a Kashtira deck with a lot of quick play spells in hopes of using those to break fields, and they do this to you, nice deck. Very fun. I don't know, It's really insane how the answer to the toxic Kashtira meta is to become more toxic in response. So that's awesome. And I guess Branded would have done this anyways, but I'm not happy with seeing this card on the meta. Other big improvements with the deck, I'd say, is Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. This one wasn't as popular, but we did see it in the 2 of the first place lists or second place lists for the Branded deck. And I think there's a good reason why. So when they go for the standard combo we talked about, the number 2 combo for Kashtira that locks 3 zones, you can still use Branded Fusion, but if you go for Rin Broom, it doesn't always break the field if there's someone Fenrir of Shangri-Ira. It doesn't really do enough by itself. You may feel like you have hope, but you don't. So what's the solution to that? Well, these guys are playing Dark Magician, because you go Branded Fusion for Lubellion, send Dark Magician, then shuffle it back plus Lubellion for Dragoon, or Elbaz you can shuffle back. Now you can summon a guy that's really strong because they can't Arise Hard, they can't Fenrir it. If you negate something, it goes up to 4,000, so it's hard to kill. It pops, it burns, and it should clean up the field pretty well. Pretty solid and gives you a really strong chance of actually winning the game through that combo. That's what I talk about when I'm saying people prepared for that combo above all else. But if we start seeing people do other combos way more frequently, then maybe this loses its merit because it's no longer coming up as much. If they're just going for a Rise Heart Pass, then maybe the Dragoon stuff is not as strong. Probably is, but maybe it's not worth the brick because you can do other stuff that's still powerful. If they're doing the lock 5, like we saw in the finals, then Branded Fusion does nothing, obviously. Interesting development with Dark Magician, and I understand it, but I feel like this deck's also kind of bricky and already loses to Ash, and it doesn't solve either of those things. It does solve some issues, but I think the Despy deck is still flawed. Something else that's important to note with the Branded decks that seems doing well was the removal of the Bestial cards. In previous formats, we'd played a lot of Bestials to deal with tier elements, which makes sense, but now this format, we're deciding, okay, Bestials are only good in the Branded Mirror and not much other stuff. They theoretically are engine pieces. So it was kind of contentious how many Bestials you played, and what we saw a lot of success this weekend was minimal. 1 Lubellion, 1 Saronir. Giving you a little bit of Bestial presence and some engine with those cards, but they decided that these engine pieces were not the strongest engine pieces and also not the strongest utility cards. So it wasn't good at enough of the jobs it was meant to do to play a full suite of them. Having the light target and a little bit for combos was nice once that it's searchable, but overly investing in them, they decided was not worth it, and I think that's a fantastic development in the deck, because drawing those cards really isn't the best. Most of the time I drew Lubellion, I found I didn't even want to discard it. I just wanted to fuse it away as a light, at which point anything can do that, including more utility cards like as we see here, Nibiru, they fit in more utility this way, which is absolutely understandable. But also we saw cut entirely from these top deck lists was Patchwork. Let's see here, 0. The fight for stuff has fallen out of favor completely. It seems like a lot of the issues tend to be with extra deck space. You go for different type of fusion plays with like Masquerade and Queritus and Chimera, but when dealing with the Mind Hacker, you need more doubles in your extra deck. There's really just not enough space for it all, and we can see here that there's not even a Masquerade, I think, in this deck list. There's one in Top Cut, and it was for time, right? So that game plan is very much switching up with this deck. With Despia, it is not the same beast that was before. I do think it makes the deck worse versus a lot of mid-range stuff. Like when I was playing ninjas or trying out Fluanderies, I felt like part of the reason I struggled versus Despia was I didn't have a great way of dealing with Poly into Chimera. So seeing that that's no longer going to be a threat for me as a mid-range player makes my matchup not as bad as I thought it was. Interesting development that I'm not quite sure I agree with, but I guess they really wanted to fit in more utility cards to keep up with Kashtira going second, which I guess they don't have a choice with because, again, not playing the game into these fields is pretty rough. We also saw these lists play Fusion Deployment, which makes sense because Cartesia is great for playing through Ash. Not always, but sometimes it can, and that helps. While also helping you play through other fields, and something Albaz is just decent. Was also pretty cool is in the side deck, Neospatian Aquadolphin. This isn't a fully new tech. It was something that players talked about a couple months ago. People decided against it because Fusion Deployment didn't have enough utility in other situations. But now with utility, the deployment being able to summon other cards than just Dolphin, such as Cartesia, there's a lot more merit to it. Now, if it wasn't obvious, you summon Dolphin from the deck, you discard, you rip Ash, Brand Fusion resolves, bada bing, bada boom, you're golden. I don't think there's much more to talk about. I think that the one is pretty understandable, and I would not be surprised to see it as a staple in this deck moving forward. Interesting to note here in the side deck is Contact Z. It's a card that I sided as well. I think that card is very strong against Despia, not just against Kashtira. In fact, I think it's maybe not that great against Kashtira. I think when you play against Despia and they go like Branded Fusion, Summon Lubellion, discard a card, if you Contact Z them there, they don't have an out most of the time. However, as you can see, Charlie was prepared and played Sprint, the Honor Dash Dragon. That is the out to it. Now, obviously, you can also get the Spriggan's Kit from the deck, which is why you played that. I'd like to believe that he was playing the card and knew it as a threat and then prepared for it. So if other people did it as well. If Sprint is being played in these decks, then Contact Z loses a lot of value. However, if people don't play Sprint, we could see Contact Z become a very strong, viable option against this deck in the future. As you can see here, the next Despia deck in Top Cut did not play it. Only the second place team did. The Sprint, at least. Another innovation that came up with Despia was not something we saw in Top 4, but we did see it in Top 8, and that was Borreload Furious Dragon. Borreload Furious Dragon is pretty much Scrap Dragon during either player's turn, requiring 2 Dark Dragon monsters, so you can make it pretty easily in the Despia deck. But the biggest reason to play it was when you had the Albion field and they changed Rivalry, the Warlords, to your Albion effect, you could make Borreload Furious Dragon using the Albion and the Fallen Albaz. I don't know if this is enough to still win the game. It very well could be enough, and I'm not sure if it warrants the extra deck spot in a very tight extra deck already, but these guys did have success with it, and I felt like it was worth mentioning because it does address a problem the deck has, and that is some of these floodgates like Skill Drain and Rivalry. So something else that was also interesting in these deck lists is Super Polymerization, that everyone thought may be a strong tech card for this format to deal with Kashtira and Despia. It's not a card that's overly present. It looks like in Top 4 at least, it was only used within the Despia decks because you have a little more synergy with it, but even then it was relegated to the side deck for 2 of them, and I am curious to see where it'll stand in the future. I do think it's not as good as it seems at first glance, and it may start being relegated further and further out of the decks until it's eventually no longer there. I think because of Mind Hacker that playing 2 Mud Dragons is not good, and I think against Despia it's not actually that good either, and going first with it, it's not fantastic because into like the actual Kashtira monsters, not that strong. So the next deck to go over is the Labyrinth deck. This probably has the least amount of stuff to go over. The Labyrinth decks here, there weren't as many in Top 4. So we look at Ryan Hughes here, as well as we look at like something like Herman Hansen's, who was in Top 8. I don't think we really saw Sphere Mode and Lava Golem in the main deck. I think they're mostly relegated to the side, which is interesting because if people know what you're playing and they hit your back row with the Shangri-Ira combo for 3 even, kind of just screwed, and I don't love that as a strategy. However, going first, they are very well positioned with 26 trap cards and then a bunch of ways to search it, and then a bunch of easy ways to kill. Lord of Heavenly Prison was a big one as well, being a way to keep engine going pretty well, and also turning on Eradicator Epidemic Virus, which we can see in Ryan's side deck. I think Herman played more copies of to get to it more consistently. And as we saw in that game with Herman Hansen in top 8, it was a blowout. Obviously, it works with more than just the Lord of Heavenly Prison, and I think it is a strong option for the Labyrinth deck to beat stuff like Lightning Storm without being a kind of just mech card like Judgment. Judgment was a card that Ryan did not play. However, or sorry, not playing the main, but Herman did. I don't love it in the main. I think as we saw against Dom in that top 8 match, Judgment was kind of just not that good of a card. If it was a better card, there was a very good chance that Herman could have got out of that better. Interesting to note here as well that Ryan did not go for the fake out side deck or extra deck strategy. His extra deck is punishment targets and a couple other stuff. This means if they do mind hacker them, they will know he's playing a trap deck and they could hit the back row. So interesting to see how that panned out for him, because I would have expected it to be a lot worse. Obviously, if you play versus other decks, though, you are well positioned because they're not locked in your zone, just at 5 and you're just chilling. Any of their monster disruption is not going to be that useful, such as the Gimmick Puppet combo. So if the end boards transition away from like Brandon Red Chimera stuff and it's just Gimmick Puppet, then a trap deck is a great way to counter that because you don't care. Okay, so I think that covers pretty much all of what I wanted to go over for the meta analysis. Where do I think everything lies right now? I think as we go forward, I do think Kashtira and Despia will continue to dominate. I think Labyrinth may fall down here, and these may just stick around as well, each kind of figuring out where they stand. I think Ninja will prove it deserves to be here, but they may not have the tools to compete consistently, as much flexibility to dodge all the utility cards as these two decks do. I think Kashtira can fit enough utility cards in that it can adapt to whatever threat becomes the most popular. And moving forward, I'd like to try something like main deck Lightning Storm Nibiru as well as quick play spells in Kashtira to see if that's good, to better combat what other people are doing, and then mostly going for the Arise Heartline playing, while also sometimes locking 5. Same time, Nibiru might be bad if everyone's doing that as well, but we'll see. And Despia, I think, will continue to move in a way that we saw the second place guys do it. They had a very clean list, a lot of strong tech options. I think we will still continue to see Dolphin, Dragoon, Gimmick Puppet, all very, very good options that other decks will have to adjust to. And the Labyrinth, I don't know where it moves on from here. I think for the most part it stays the same. I'd argue maybe more Lord of the Heavenly Prisons in the main deck, because if people do start playing more back removal, even if it's just on the side, I would like to have more answers to it. Lord of Heavenly is great at doing that, while also providing disruption or follow-up later. So yeah, I think these other decks will fall off as people realize they really don't have what it takes to keep up with the rest of the decks, and we'll have to save tier for another day. And that's it for now. Thank you guys for watching so much. If you enjoyed this type of heavy and dense metagame discussion, please let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.